November 10th is Veterans Appreciation Event at Hershey High School. You can contact Angie Grabuloff for that. I have her information if you'd like to go. She'd like to know when you're coming, so ask me out later and I'll give you the contact information. Lower Dauphin, are you here? No. Okay. Steph Chortenoff, who does it every year, has what they call Visit with Vets on November 20th at 11 o'clock. If you'd like to go to that and be a part of it, meet the students, talk to them about the service. It's a very nice event, and the students are very eager to learn about military service. November 13th, the Good Hope Middle School are looking for veterans of any service, any time period, not just war times, to come and talk to the students about that. And it's good that these people are getting the students interested, or at least understanding of what the military is all about. So if you can, please do that. I also have contact information for Jake Miller, who is running it. He's a teacher there. And my final reminder is that, for those of you who don't remember, we do accept a free will offering from our Helmet Committee. Frank Rowe and Rich Lytle in the back as you leave. Remember, we don't charge, but we're happy to accept your contributions. Thank you very much. Normally, I give a story about what happened in November. And much to your pleasure tonight, I'm not going to. Instead, we have a video to introduce our topic of the evening, and then Charlie Lloyd will take over and talk to you about our speakers. Excuse me. I missed one. Good grief, I'm sorry. Ricky Hollis, would you like to talk about the Civil War and events? I'm sorry.
Also, first, let's know Richard Burton's not here. Him and his wife are out spending their children's inheritance in Europe. So, but this for the Vietnam Roundtable meeting meets the second Thursday at the Vietnam Veterans of America at 8000 Derry Street. The talk, it's November the 9th. The talk is by Bruce Designer. I apologize, I spelled his name wrong. He's going to talk about his experiences in the 25th Infantry, which is the Wolfhounds. That's this coming Thursday. The following Thursday is a Hershey Civil Roundtable, and we're going to have Dr. Terry Alford, Fortune's Fool. It's going to be about John Wilkes Booth, and Dr. Alford is nationally known about the knowledge of John Wilkes Booth. So, and just equipment for the Harrisburg.
Yeah, the Harrisburg Civil War Roundtables meeting is on Friday, the 17th of November. Exceptionally, this will take place at the National Civil War Museum. The speaker that evening is Dr. Susanna Ural, who will be talking about her new book on General Hood's Texas Brigade. That begins at 6 o'clock at the Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, with a reception at 6:45 for the speaker. Also, just a reminder that the Hershey and Harrisburg Civil War Roundtable field trip to Shenandoah Valley takes place this Saturday. We still have room on the bus. If you're interested, I have flyers and can sign you up. We need to get you signed up yet tonight. We leave 6 o'clock Saturday morning. Thank you.
I apologize for flying by you. Sorry?
Trains and Troops this weekend. At Strasburg, Trains and Troops this weekend.
Strasburg Rail Museum is doing what?
Yeah. The Trains and Troops show is a Saturday and Sunday at the Trains and Troops.
Thank you. Did everybody hear that? Trains and Troops to the Strasburg Railway this weekend. I didn't know about that. What else did I miss here? I apologize for that. No, I think I got the rest of the cover. Okay. So, without further ado, we'll go into our video, which will set the stage for tonight's presentation. And Charlie will then take over from there. Thank you.
I'm speaking from London. It is late afternoon, and the people of London are preparing for the night. Everyone is anxious to get home before darkness falls, before our nightly visitors arrive. This is the London rush hour. Many of the people at whom you are looking now are members of the greatest civilian army ever to be assembled. These men and women who have worked all day in offices or in markets are now hurrying home to change into the uniform of their particular service. The dusk is deepening. Listening crews are posted all the way from the coast to London to pick up the drone of the German planes. Soon the nightly Battle of London will be on. This has been a quiet day for us, but it won't be a quiet night. We haven't had a quiet night now for more than 5 weeks. They'll be over tonight. They'll destroy a few buildings and kill a few people. Probably some of the people you are watching now. Now they're going into the public shelters. This is not a pleasant way to spend the night, but the people accept it as their part in the defense of London. These civilians are good soldiers. Now it's 8 o'clock. Jerry is a little bit late tonight. The searchlights are in position. The guns are ready. The People's Army of Volunteers is ready. They are the ones who are really fighting this war. The firemen, the air raid wardens, the ambulance drivers. And there's the wail of the banshee. The nightly siege of London has begun. The city is dressed for battle. Here they come. Now the searchlights are poking long, white, inquisitive fingers into the blackness of the night. These are not Hollywood sound effects. This is the music they play every night in London, the symphony of war. That was a bomb. The very young and the very old, with that deep wisdom given only to the very young and the very old, who sleep in the shelters. Do you see any signs of fear on these faces? Now the army of the people swings into action. The bombs have started fires. When the bomber starts a fire, he immediately returns, uses it as a target, and drops more bombs, hoping to spread the fire. Yet the People's Army ignores the bombs and the spent shrapnel which rains down constantly. Brokers, clerks, peddlers, merchants by day, they are heroes by night. The night is long, but sooner or later the dawn will come. The German bombers are creatures of the night. They melt away before the dawn and scurry back to the safety of their own aerodromes. And there's the wail of the banshee again, this time a friendly way. The all-clear signal tells us that the bombers have gone. It's just 6 a.m. In this last hour of precious sleep, the strange new world finds peace. London raises her head, shakes the debris of the night from her hair, and takes stock of the damage done. London has been hurt during the night. The sign of a great fighter in the ring is, can he get up from the floor after being knocked down? London does this every morning. London doesn't look down upon the ruins of its houses, upon those made homeless during the night, upon the remains of churches, hospitals, workers' flats. London looks upwards toward the dawn and faces the new day with calmness and confidence. The People's Army go to work as they did in that other comfortable world which came to an end when the invader began to attack the last strongholds of freedom. Not all the services run as they did yesterday, but London manages to get to work on time, one way or another. In the center of the city, the shops are open as usual. In fact, many of them are more open than usual. Dr. Paul Joseph Gills said recently that the nightly air raids have had a terrific effect upon the morale of the people of London. The good doctor is absolutely right. Today the morale of the people is higher than ever before. They are fused together, not by fear, but by a surging spirit of courage the like of which the world has never known. They know that thousands of them will die, but they would rather stand up and face death than kneel down and face the kind of existence the conqueror would impose upon them. And they know, too, and are comforted by the thought that England is not taking its beating lying down. They are guarding the frontiers of freedom. It is hard to see 5 centuries of labor destroyed in 5 seconds. But London is fighting back. I am a neutral reporter. I have watched the people of London live and die ever since death in its most ghastly garb began to come here as a nightly visitor 5 weeks ago. I have watched them stand by their homes. I have seen them made homeless. I have seen them move to new homes. And I can assure you, there is no panic, no fear, no despair in London town. There is nothing but determination, confidence, and high courage among the people of Churchill's Island. And they know that every night the RAF bombers fly deep into the heart of Germany, bombing munition works, airplane factories, canals, cutting the arteries which keep the heart of Germany alive. It is true that the Nazis will be over again tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every day. They will drop thousands of bombs, and they'll destroy hundreds of buildings, and they'll kill thousands of people. But a bomb has its limitations. It can only destroy buildings and kill people. It cannot kill the unconquerable spirit and courage of the people of London. London can take it.
Good evening. Quite a crowd. I'm glad to see you. Thank you for coming. It's a special night. It began back in June. We were at the World War II weekend in Reading. Rather fitting that this whole thing began in a hangar. I looked over and I saw these people sitting around that table, and they were talking. I had no idea what they were talking about. They were talking about the Blitz. They were born and lived through it. And I thought, what a unique opportunity to capture these voices that were there from the past. So we have tonight 3 people that were there, 2 people that were there, and a moderator for the 3rd one. Richard was the one at the end of the table. We know Richard Boyd, we know him well. He was born in 1921, November the 17th. I know that because I was born November 18th. And his daughter was born November 19th. We're like a triple. Richard was bombed out. I remember him telling me his father built a bomb shelter. They went on with it. He saw the planes bombing as a young man. He was also a national champion football player. But over there, it's called soccer. But he was a national champion. At age 19, he joined the RAF as one of 557 cadets. Arnold had a program. England didn't have enough pilots or planes, so they sent the 550 cadets to Albany, Georgia, where he became a pilot, and then he became an instructor. And from there, they sent him, I think they sent all of them back but 7, and he went to Texas and became an instructor, and he taught our aviation cadets to fly medium and heavy bombers. And then he came back and got a chance to get even for the Blitz. He flew Lancaster bombers, crew of 7, and it's a little scary to think about it, but 1 pilot. So they became very close. They needed a pilot, and the pilot needed them. And he'll relate his story when we get on the stage. We also have Brian Woodcock for return engagement. He doesn't have his MacArthur uniform on, but he brought some of his memories with him. He also was born prior to the Blitz and lived there. In fact, you might remember the story. They were bombed out of their houses 4 times, and they were on a train, and they got bombed again. So he has some memories he'll share with us as well. He immigrated to this country in 1957. I got it. Okay, 57. I'll just whisper. Okay. He went in the U.S. Army, and then he was crew chief, flying choppers. Every chopper made, he flew. And then he went to Boeing, and he was at Boeing for a good number of years, where he met his lovely bride, Linda. There you are. I didn't see you. And then when he retired from there, he kept him. He was in the Delaware Valley Aviation Hall of Fame, and he's also honorary Lieutenant Governor of Delaware. Congratulations on that. The other person at the table was Kathleen McNally, 93, 94-year-old little lady. Beautiful, beautiful little lady with silver hair and great memories of the war. She actually graduated high school and then went into the Land Army. You'll see these photos coming up. But she was in the Land Army all those years. And then from there, she raised her family. She actually has some health issues. She's unable to attend tonight. But we got her book. She did a bio from the Air Force in England, and it's an amazing document. And now that document's going to be in the hands of our moderator, Catherine Boyd. And Catherine's going to lead the group and share with us what you probably have a rare chance of hearing. That's the first-person narrative for the Blitz. So we can take your seats, and we'll go from there. And then after that, we'll have a question and answer period. Okay? Catherine's helping her father to the stage, Richard Boyd. She's going to moderate from that part. And Brian, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much.
stories of different individuals who suffered through Britain's war. And unfortunately, Kathleen can't be with us. She's a wonderful Brit. I was told to bring my accent with me, but I lost that quite a while ago. What we are going to show after the film, after the video, is 3 maps. The first one is the map of the bombs that landed the first night of the Blitz. The second map is the bombs after 1 month. And the third is the aggregate of the Blitz and all of the bombs. There's an interactive site, if anybody wants to look it up, that you can actually go and find the street and how many bombs landed on that street. So first, we're going to go a little bit backward on the declaration of war. That was September 3rd, 1939. Now, Brian was 3, so he doesn't have as much memory as Richard, who was 17 at the time. So, Richard, can you tell us what your family felt about the war and the announcement?
Sure. My war started on September 3rd, 1939, when I sat with my parents and my young sister and listened to the Prime Minister of Britain declare war on Germany. My father's reaction was very volatile because he pointed out we just recovered from 7 years of financial chaos and 3 years recovery, and we weren't prepared for war. But the first idea that we had, there was a war on, let me put it that way. The first indication we had a war was the government distributed gas masks to everybody in a car.
What were your parents working and doing at the time?
My parents? My father was in the London County Council, that's the governing body in London, and his offices were in Westminster, in the centre of London. I was employed in a financial offices of an engineering company, some 20 minutes away from my home. My sister was in high school. And the result of all that was that
So life was pretty normal.
I would say that we continued living normally, routine, went to business, went in the evening, we used our usual activities. I was in Boy Scouts, I was in soccer practice, things like that. And then we had a distribution of...
Let's find out more about Brian and what his family was doing at that time.
What most people don't understand is when they declared war in 1939, nothing happened for a year. It was called the phony war. But in a way, it gave England a chance to scratch everything together and get prepared. And so the first thing they did was produce gas masks, because they'd only learned from World War I that gas was used. So I had my little gas mask, and I never could get it on. But nothing really happened until 1940. And in that time, there'd be a knock on the door, and this gentleman would have a truckload of corrugated steel pieces shaped like this. It asked how many people were in the families, and they would give you so many pieces of these steel pieces, a big bag of bolts. And you had to dig a hole and erect this half shelter into the ground, and then put dirt over the top and pray to God. And they were called Anderson shelters. There were places that had no ground, like in the city, so they would build concrete block houses at the end of the street. And these concrete block houses had a big opening where you could go in, but they put a concrete blast wall in front of it, so any bombs exploding outside wouldn't go into the bomb shelter. Well, I'll divert and give you a funny incident. We had one at the end of our street, but this was in 1941. We were all in there, the sirens had gone off, I was in there with my mother, my friend was in there with his mother, and the bombing was going on, and the anti-aircraft guns were firing, and we're all sitting there happy as little clams, because we were living through this. And all of a sudden, an incendiary bomb fell right between the blast door and the opening of the shelter. Now, the incendiary bombs were about that long and about 3 or 4 inches in diameter, and they were full of magnesium. When they would hit, they would go off, and all this magnesium would set fires everywhere, extremely hot. But when that happened, the shelter was blinded with magnesium light, and all the people all slid up one end of the shelter at one end, and my mother started to laugh, and then everybody started to laugh. So along came a firefighter, he dumped a bucket of water and sand on the bomb and put it out. But let's go up to 2 years ago when the phone rang at home. And this thing that Jacques said, "Is that you, Brian?" "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Barry Potts, remember? Remember that bloody night when that bomb fell between the blast shelter?" He was in Florida, and he'd married an American girl, found me, and we got together, and we joked and laughed about those days. That was our experience for the shelter. The other shelters were in the city, the subways, and there were huge concrete buildings that had big basements. So what you saw up there was a big S. That was a shelter here. And another thing you have to remember is things were so much different and so far back that as 4 years old, our English school system started at 4. So I started at 4, walked to school on my own at 4 during a war. That's hard to believe, isn't it? Today, you let your kid walk down the block without anybody, they put you in jail. But in those days, it was an entirely different situation. Every day was a crisis. And that's my story on shelters.
Well, a little bit about Kathleen. So with Brian, who was actually a young child, Richard, who was working as an accountant and clerk. Kathleen was from the south end of the city. She had a mother, father, sister, and she was a schoolgirl in the upper grades. Her father owned a manufacturing plant, and she calls her life before this September 3rd as magical. Life centered around family and children, family and church. And she recalls that on the day of the announcement, they had been very apprehensive about the war. And because of the proximity of her hometown to London, the following day, the Admiralty moved in and took over the town, thus activating all the precautionary measures that were taken, which included the bomb shelters and gas masks. And Richard, you dug the hole for the Anderson shelter, didn't you?
Well, following what Brian says, what happened once we had the alert by the Prime Minister, then nothing happened. As he said, somebody even published newsprint. It was a phony war. But we received the gas mask, followed by ration books for food, ration books for clothing. Then we had orders to blacken out the house. The house had to be blacked out so that no light was visible after dark. Local citizens became air raid wardens, and they would wander around and advise the occupant if there was any light visible. And it was as if there was no war, as I said. And then problem occurred in Europe, Dunkirk, when made a move about it. And then the government issued an emergency order for the formation of a home guard, which was to protect Great Britain. And I volunteered for the home guard. I got a uniform, a rifle, and for the rest of the early part of 40 I went to business during the day, and at weekends I was taking military exercises and field exercises in the Surrey Docks, which was part of London there, and they anticipated Germany coming in with paratroopers, things like that. However, the start of the Blitz now that you've heard about, in my case, it was on September 7th, 1940, and I was just leaving a soccer stadium in southwest of England, southwest of London, and with some teammates, and somebody said, the RAF is putting on a good show. And when we looked out over the River Thames, you saw this enormous formation of aircraft coming up the Thames towards the centre of London. And just as he said that, the air raid sirens went off, the guns went off, and the bombs started to fall. That was my initiation to the Blitz.
I'd just like to add some historical content here. What Richard witnessed was 348 German bombers escorted by 670 fighter bombers coming up the Thames. It started at 4 p.m. It ended at 6 p.m. Then 2 hours later, a second group came, and that lasted until 4:30 in the morning. Can you describe what it was like trying to get home from the field?
Yeah. Well, as Brian said, we all got an Anderson shelter, so sometime earlier I had spent time with my father erecting this Anderson shelter in the back garden. It was furnished with 4 bunks, bedding, bottled water, flashlights, and we waited for the bombing to come. Well, it didn't come for almost a year, but when it did come, everybody, as he said, retreated to the shelter. And I would normally, from my soccer stadium to my home, was about a 30-minute pass. That night, I probably took over an hour and a half to get home, because as I approached the area in which I lived, Deptford, near the river, the transport stopped. So we had to do a lot of walking, and at the same time, the bombing was going on, or the guns were firing. So it was almost after dark when I finally joined the family in the bomb shelter, and we stayed there the first night, all night, in the bomb shelter. Yes.
Can you imagine shock and awe? We all know what that's like. People seeing the sky almost black,
Yeah.
the bomb was coming, with no end in sight. And yet, I don't think I ever heard of any real panic.
No.
I just think I went to the shelters in an orderly fashion.
Mhm.
But
And I think today, if anybody knows an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, these were young people.
don't forget, we were brought up in the Victorian era.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
We absolutely were very disciplined. And that's one of the reasons why I came to America. It's a lot easier over here. But we were, saluting the flag, proud of the king and queen, proud of ourselves. That went a long way to keeping panic down.
That's
Order
right.
and
You were
discipline.
told what to do, you were expected to do it, you were expected to help.
Yeah.
And that's why I love this guy, because we've got a common bond. We're both men who were in the Royal Air Force. And we both know what each other went through.
I have to say that this, when I joined this Home Guard and took all these exercises and that, the thing that stopped the action of the Home Guard, we realized we weren't going to protect the docks anymore, because on September 7th, 40, was the beginning of the Blitz. And as I said, I saw this coming right up the river there, and we made this effort to get home and so on. But from that moment on, that Blitz stopped all routine activity. Fortunately, my place of business was only a 20-minute walk, but my father had to commute into the centre of the city to Westminster. There were times he didn't appear for several hours because he couldn't return back into the south side of the city. And I would say from September through
May.
to the end of May, we had continuous bombing. It started by day, as I said, it started in the late afternoon and day, and at the beginning it was all day bombing. But for a very short time, because the RAF punished the Luftwaffe so badly, they changed into night bombing. Now for us, it worked out very well, because to do business by day with day bombing going on and dashing into the shelter regularly, you didn't get much business done. But the moment it went to night bombing, business sort of returned to normal. We only went 9 to 5 and work proceeded, but then you went home and the night you lived in the shelter.
This went on for 8 months, and it wasn't just London. There were a total of 16 cities being bombed in England. London was just one of them. So even those being evacuated, I think the number is, in the first 3 days, 1.5 million people were evacuated out of London. So they were evacuated to places that then had to be evacuated. And I think we'll hear more about that a little bit later.
A lot of the families allowed their children to be evacuated out to foster homes. And my parents, my father was a London firefighter, they decided to keep me in London. So I didn't get the luxury of getting out of town.
Kathleen was a schoolgirl in her upper grades, and she was evacuated in a town south England, and she had to finish her university exam, so she was placed with an elderly couple who never had children. And Richard's sister was evacuated.
The whole school was evacuated south of London into a town there, and they were there for some 2 months, and then when the bombing pattern changed, they returned to London, and my sister was regularly an occupant of the bomb shelter with my parents, the four of us there. And this went on until, as we said, well, from my point of view, it started to fall away about March of the following year, 41, and it ceased, as I remember, in May 41. Now, during that time, the way of life changed completely. I mean, when it first started, I went to adult education at night. I had Boy Scouts, I had soccer practice. Every evening was occupied with some activity. By the time we got beyond the Christmas, I had no activity outside during the nights. I just went back to the house, and usually as soon as it became dark, the sirens went off, and we went in there. Probably only the saving part for London was prior to the Christmas period. There was lots of fog and bad visibility, and so there was no bombing during that period. But it continued right through until May of 41.
And there's a comment here from Kathleen in her words. Everybody in England had a job to do. Streets were organized that there were always air raid wardens on duty watching for bombs and fires. Every householder was responsible for the total blackout of their home. Each house had a stirrup pump to put out fires. Even after working all day, everyone had to do something to contribute to the security and safety of their community. Everyone pitched in.
I could add to that. As I said, I was in the Home Guard until the bombings started, and there was a period there where I then resigned from the Home Guard, and I joined the Royal Air Force Air Training Corps, ATC, preparatory to trying to get into the service. But at the same time, together with 2 or 3 senior Boy Scouts that were with me, we volunteered as messengers in the local police precinct. When scheduled, we would report with bicycle. We would receive a steel helmet, get a badge to show you that you were official, and then I used to sit in a cell in the precinct, a prison cell, and when you were ready, they'd bring you up, you'd take a message, off you would go to deliver the message. Communications became extremely bad because of all the bombing. But I had a couple of incidents. One night I was on a trip and the bombing got rather intense where we were going, so we hid into a tunnel under the railroad yards there for the passengers to walk under. We hid in the tunnel. Fortunately, we were not in direct aim of the bomb, but a bomb landed at the entrance to the side of the tunnel, but the blast blew us all back right through the tunnel. Bicycle, helmets, and everything. On another occasion, when transiting the neighborhood, going through an intersection, a bomb at the other end gave over, the blast came down the street, and I was blown off my bike and right into somebody's front yard there. So we had some adventures like that. But finally...
For Kathleen, just to mention what they were doing in the war. Kathleen actually joined the Women's Land Army, and she was sent to a farm. And so for much of, how many months here, she was on a farm, pitching hay, plowing. Now this was a gal at this point who would be about 16 or 17. And she said one of the best things about our time at the farm was that we were fed magnificently compared with what was going on in the civilian population. Our breakfast there were 4 eggs on each of our plates, whereas in civilian life, if we got an egg once a month, it was a miracle. So there were advantages. That was Kathleen's, a portion of her contribution to the war effort. So there's very diverse stories here, depending on age and where people were located.
I had one little job. Everything was heated by coal. Every house had a fireplace. And if you were lucky, you had enough money to buy enough coal. But in my case, since I like trains, I used to go down to the local high-speed line. And there was a curve in that high-speed line. And the steam locomotives would come flying around that curve. And coal would fall off. So I go along there with a big cardboard box and pick up these big lumps of coal and carry them home. That was my job.
So there were a lot of close calls. And Richard has mentioned a couple. I will read from Kathleen's account. By this time she was living in London, and she had been assigned to a field engineer crew when she was conscripted. And she writes here, of course we had no food for animals. Just once in a while they would fly in some horse meat from Belgium. It would come to this market and the word would spread immediately. So in this case, you would go down and you'd have to queue and you would get a little tiny package of horse meat. And that's how she fed her cat. On this particular day, the line was long, but I gave up my lunch hour, went down, stood in queue, and did get the tiny package, and left, and I walked back up the steep hill. I literally had my hand on the doorknob when behind me was this tremendous explosion. It was a direct hit on the market by a high explosive bomb. 182 people died that day. People who I'd been standing in queue with, just gone. So that's a little bit more about Kathleen. Ryan, I think you have some things to share.
Humorous event. My father came home with a chicken. Eggs were very rare in those days. Rationing was, I think, 1 per family per week.
Something like
Per
that.
month.
So Dad came home with a chicken. He was a hero. Except we found out as soon as the chicken laid the egg, the damn thing would eat it. So my mother flipped him upside the head, told him an idiot, because he paid so much for it. But then my mother was smart. We stuffed this stupid bird into a box with some wire. When it started to lay an egg, it would cackle. So my mother would run out and wait. As soon as that chicken dropped the egg, she'd grab the egg. Hey, it worked. Okay, sure enough, one day, the air raid warning is going off. We're in our little Anderson shelter, no more than from here to there from the chicken. We can hear the anti-aircraft guns going, we can hear the bombs dropping. That stupid chicken started to cackle. So my mother, where are you going, Mom? I want to get that bloody egg. So now I can hear bombs getting closer and closer. My mother's out there, the chicken's doing its thing. She dropped the egg. My mother grabbed it, ran back in the shelter, and the bomb hit a chapel, blew up the chapel, and all this debris came down around our shelter. But my mother got that bloody egg. So then,
Do you gentlemen want to talk a little bit about rationing and what it was like? And food and clothing?
I don't remember the paperwork end of it, but I do remember having to go to the spoon store, get in line for hours.
Yeah.
So when my mother came, I was up almost close to the counter. And then when she would get there, sorry, all sold out.
Yeah. Richard?
Yeah, that was the job of all the mothers at that time, because there was no big supermarkets or anything like you have today. You had a local little shopping centre with 6 or 8 diverse stores, and your mother in the morning would get, after you went off to business, she would get her shopping basket and she would proceed down to the store to see what was available. And as Brian says, some days there was nothing available. Other days, word would get out, there was a delivery of some kind of food, meat, egg, or whatever, and everybody would be lined up right down the street. All these mothers with the baskets trying to get food. That was the primary task, very difficult task of all mothers, to feed their families, because ration books didn't provide very much.
And that was every day. We didn't shop by the week.
No, that's every day. That's every morning.
Yeah, my grandmother had a cold cellar and not a refrigerator.
Right.
And the gardens, we were talking at dinner about, with
Yeah,
vegetable gardens.
Oh, yeah. Well, that happened, I mean, the war was on September 3rd, and as I said, we had this period where we were introduced into the war, and then in the new year, in the local park, which was about 2 blocks from our place, they removed all the tennis court equipment, and the grass tennis court was then cut up into segments. They called them allotments, and then they were leased to families, and you were allowed to have a victory garden there. You grew all your vegetables and so on. So one of my first jobs in the beginning of 41 was to turn a grass plot into a garden to assist my father, and then he went on to grow vegetables for, I would say, the next 8 years from that plot.
Yeah. So now we're getting into somewhere around 1941, and Richard left. Richard joined the Royal Air Force. But the war didn't end, and even after 8 months, the bombings didn't end. There were still the B-1s and the B-2s. Brian, do you think you could explain some of what went on? London, the fires and the...
Well, my personal experience was we were bombed out of our apartments 3 times in less than 2 months. And my father came home one day, and it was a wonder he wasn't killed. Because in those days, they fought the fires during the bombing. There was no shelters for them to go to. And he came home, I do remember, because the whole family was in an uproar. We're leaving town. He got a transfer to another town. It was transferred to a little town 30 miles north of London called Luton.
Luton.
And incidentally, if you remember the shoe bomber, he came from Luton. Because when Linda and I went back to my home village, it was almost 100% Muslim. That was the group that sent the shoe bomber over. But anyway, the night we were to leave London, I believe there's a picture of St. Pancras Station. You have to remember this was a dead-end station where the trains would pull in, the steam locomotives would stop, you couldn't go any further. But then they would bring another locomotive in and put it on the other end, and that would be the outgoing train. So, now, every station was full of people, soldiers, sailors, airmen, people. There were masses of people trying to get out of town because the trains were, even though they were regular, they were overpowered by people moving. So as we got to the station, the air raid warning started to go off. Now, the coaches next to this dead-end stop, they're all full. So the farther we walked, we knew that the empty cars were all the way up by the locomotive. And as the sirens went off, the lights went on, searchlights, and the aircraft guns. Now, as we're walking faster and faster up the station platform, getting through all these people, looking for a room, every coach was full. Finally, we got up by the locomotive, and there was standing room only, and we crammed into there. No sooner than we got in there, than we heard these massive explosions. And I showed my wife one day when we went back to St. Pancras. They've torn them down now. There were these huge gas holders, the kind that they slide up inside of these big girders, right outside of St. Pancras. And they were lighting up from the exploding bombs behind us. And there's a picture, I believe you have it.
Yeah.
On that night, that station, we pulled out as the bomb hit the end of the tracks. And my father, we were all screaming with terror, regardless of what that movie said. We were terrified. And my father yelled out, hang on, they're not bombs, they're guns, they're the anti-aircraft guns. So everybody quieted down. And I swear that engineer, he had that throttle right up behind his head. That locomotive was making more noise than the bombs blasting out of the station. And then my dad said, he looked back and he said, look, they've got one of the Jerrys in the searchlights. He won't last long. So everybody quieted down and we left. My mother said to me, the good news is my wife's heard all these stories right from my mother. Your dad was a bloody liar. They weren't guns, they were bombs. She was right. But by the grace of God, we snuck out. And again, it was another one of those days of crisis. So we got to Luton, and we lived in the basement of a house for 1 week. And that weekend, we were going out for a picnic, and my dad wanted to go fishing. When we came back, it was the first time I had a holiday. When we came back, I thought we were on the wrong street. The street wasn't there. The Germans had bombed the airport, missed, and unloaded all these bombs on the area that we were living. So that was the 4th time we were bombed out. In a way, it was lucky because the fire station had a house next to the fire station, and because Dad had priority, we got a house. And we stayed there for the rest of our lives until 1957 when I left. But there are parts of the war that we don't talk about, but you need to, because a lot like yesterday or the day before, where that idiot mowed down all those people and ran over them in the city, life can be really bad. And my father came home one day, and I remember everybody being very quiet. And then I remember him coming home from the pub, and he was very sick, and he'd gotten drunk. Later on, we found out him and another fireman had to climb up this tree because during the bombing, this hat manufacturer had all these girls working, putting hats together. The bomb came down into the building, blew the girls out into the street, into the trees. And the trees had these ladies in there with all these trimmings, and it looked like a Christmas tree of death. My dad had to bring down his people. So terror attack. And I said to my mother, what do you think about this, these terrorists? Terrorists? Let me have them. I'll show them what bloody terror means. That spirit was just like my father. You don't screw with my mother or father, because they were hardened, dyed in the wool, good people.
You know, there's an incident, my father got on a bus with his sister, and the bus kept going. Do you want to describe that?
Yeah, I had taken my sister up to centre of London to a show, and we were coming home, and the buses in London were double-deckers, and the driver was on the top right, bottom right side, and we were heading homeward, and we were in the south side of we were on the south side of the river, and the alarm went off, sirens went off, so the bus conductor told, I was sitting 2 seats right behind the driver, we've elevated. He told us just to get down behind the seats for protection. Well, we did, and shortly thereafter there was this tremendous explosion up ahead, and the windows in the bus all shattered. We got covered in glass. It turned out it was a V2 that landed about 6 or 8 blocks up ahead, caused enormous damage. But I can't, from like Brian talks of it, the area that I lived in, we were somewhat away from the river where much of the bombing occurred. If I moved maybe 4 blocks, 5 blocks over, it was completely destroyed because the initial bombing of the Germans was to eliminate the food supply from Britain. So they now were set out to eliminate the docks and the warehouses and all that. So the initial bombing, even by day, that was to eliminate the warehouses, to cut off the food supply for London. They were very successful.
Yeah, the docks were obliterated on the first day.
That's right.
They concentrated, and the docks were completely alight from one end to the other.
That's right.
Because my father fought these fires.
That's right, yes. So
Your father was fighting the whole way through,
Yes.
even well past the 8 months.
Oh, yes.
For
Yeah.
years. Now, I mentioned that Richard went away for 2 years. And he came home to...
Yeah, well, I can tell you, in April 41, I volunteered for air crew in the Royal Air Force. And in 41, I was in very primitive conditions. I went through training. I was never on the Royal Air Force base. They always took over a private flying field somewhere or some hotel and stripped it. And for the rest of that year, and it was down at about December 41, it was about the time that Pearl Harbor occurred. I was about to solo flight, and I was ordered to stop flying and was told, you are going to continue your training in America with the Army Air Corps. So, some 5 weeks later, after much train riding, a 10-day trip across the Atlantic, and that I arrived in Georgia. I spent a year in Georgia training to become an Army Air Corps pilot in the RAF wings. And then, instead of returning to Britain as most of my fellow candidates did, 5 of us were set aside and told, you are not returning to Britain, you're going to spend another year in America as an instructor in the Army Air Corps. So we were then shifted over to Texas.
So what was the atmosphere in America, and what did you food.
Oh. It's impossible to talk about. The food was so fantastic. It started, I can tell you a story about food. Brian was talking about rationing. The first place we ended up when we came onto the American side was in Canada, in New Brunswick, in a town there, Moncton, and that was where we were reassigned. And on the first payday, a week or so after we arrived, we were allowed to go downtown. So I can always remember a gang of us, 4, went downtown. We looked at whatever entertainment there was there, but when we found a fruit store, this is no story, the four of us walked in the fruit store and bought a large bag of fruit, bananas, grape, orange, and all that. And on the way back to camp, we ate the whole damn bag full.
And Brian, you
That was
mentioned
that was the first fresh fruit I'd had in 2 years.
Brian, you mentioned about candy bars.
Well, yeah, things were really, really bad at some point in time. Food, I mean, we would go into the woods and hunt for rabbits because we would eat them. But as far as fruit was concerned, I didn't know what it was. Chocolate didn't exist. But here come these Yanks walking down the street. Hey, Nate, you got any gum? They throw it at you. Here, you kid, get lost. So I go home with candy and chocolates. One day I come home, my shirt was full. Candies, oranges. My mother said, "Where did you get all that fruit?" I said, "Mom, number 3 Peach Street, the Americans are going in and out of that house all day long. I just sat out, don't you ever go down that street again." I didn't know. I had no idea. It took me 20 more years to figure that one out. But that's a true story. There was an orange. I had the opportunity with my wife to do a gig out of Reading, and we were invited to do a MacArthur thing for this naval crew. And I told the story about this Navy officer walking down the street with a girl on each arm. And because I went after him, I made a pest of myself. "Got any gum, John? You got any chocolate?" So finally he kept going, "Get out of here, kid, hit the road, get out of here." But the girl said, "Oh, come on, I'll give him something. Get rid of the little blighter." So he took out an orange and he bolted down an alley. I went after the orange and he took off with the 2 women. And then I would say to them, "You look awful familiar." And his wife would say, "That was him, that was him."
Kathleen has something to say about the Americans and excesses. She was asked a question about whether or not the Brits resented it as they came to London with all of their goodies. And her response was, "I have to say yes, because that's the truth. It was very sad to see them arrive bright and suntanned and full of energy and sparkling uniforms and with unlimited supplies of everything. And of course financially paid beyond any dreams of our own service people who had been fighting so long and so hard already. It was very hard. And yes, even the most generous of individuals had to sense some sort of resentment here. It was just one of those things. It wasn't intentional. Nobody could have changed it, and if it were just, and we were just so glad to finally see some fresh supplies coming in.
One thing I do remember, the Canadians and the Americans were a different breed of people. Happy-go-lucky, young, vivacious, great people. And I was always so Victorian oriented, very reserved, you know. Here, come on kid, hit the road, here's a candy bar. Whoa! They were always friendly, loving people. And then, 20 years later, here I am, wearing an American uniform, flying American helicopters. I'm standing there thinking, Jesus, I came a long way, didn't I? I'm a GI, you know, I am one.
But on the subject of food, as I said, I came over to the States here for 2 years. And on the way back,
How much did you grow? This is in his records.
the food was very good. I grew 2 inches and put on 15 pounds. But on my way home, I had my Officer B4 bag with my equipment in, so I bought a Foot Locker. And in the Foot Locker, I bought at the PX and everywhere, everything in the way of perfume, toiletry, canned butter, canned food, anything you could think of. That Foot Locker was solid with all the things that were not available back. When I arrived home that night, back from America, I would tell you, I arrived at the station in London, in central London. No transport was operating, nothing going. And there was I with my bag and thing, and the taxis were coming by, so I finally managed to talk a taxi driver into taking me south. There was no blitz on it, nothing on it. So, cost me double fare, but I got down there. I got to the front of the house, and I said to him, "You got the right place?" And all the wrought iron railings and all the decor in the front of the house had disappeared. All the bushes had disappeared. And the front of the house, the windows and that were in a heck of a mess. And he said, "You got the right place, Governor." So I went to the door of the house and tried to get in. And I had a key, but apparently they changed the locks while I was away. I guess they thought I was doing it. Anyway, and that night I spent from about 1 o'clock in the morning till daybreak opening up my Foot Locker and having my family go hysterical over all the objects that I produced. And so it was shall I say, reward for my 2 years of great fun in America.
If they want us to give them an opportunity for questions and answers, so Brian, is there anything you'd like to contribute?
Well, let me just say, just to carry on a little bit, if you had cigarettes and nylons, you could buy anything. And my mother and my aunt worked in a cigarette factory. And in those days, there was a black market. And my mother was a bit of a girl. So she told my wife, "You know what, we made a few pounds. You know how we did it? I'd go in as a 34 and I'd come out as a 38.
On that happy note, thank you, Brian, Richard, Catherine, and Kathleen in absentia. What a wonderful job of talking about your experiences during the Blitz. But to put it in a perhaps grim perspective, we got to understand 32,000 Brits were killed during the Blitz. 87,000 were injured. 2 million houses were destroyed, and 60% of London was destroyed. So, to have your experiences, the way you tell it, with all that going on, that you can talk about it, I think is quite remarkable, and with such lucidity. Here's to you. Thank you so much. Now, our speakers don't go away unrewarded. Catherine, this is your first time as an actual participant. Therefore, you get the actual participant's mug.
Oh, we're gonna send that to Bethany.
And for you two, I'm calling repeat offenders. You've got your mugs, but here is a trivet type of thing to set it on. I hope you use it in good faith. So if there are questions and answers, they'll be happy to field them. We don't want to carry it too late tonight, but we'd like to have. What? Message from back there.
There was a car key found. If anybody's missing a car key, it was found down at the other end of the building. So see me back there in the morning.
Car keys found. If you lost your car keys, see clip. Okay. Any quick question and answers?
How about the V1, V2 rockets?
The V1, V2 rockets.
Yeah, I saw two V1s. One during the day when we were in our allotment digging up potatoes. It came up, we saw it come over the back of the woods and kept going. And the other time was at night. I woke up in my father's arms, even as big as I was. He was carrying me out in the garden to the shelter, and he came right over town. And it kept right on going. The V2, when it hit Luton, all this time, us children were well organized. No matter where we went or what we were doing, somebody was in charge of us. This one day, I was going to the bathroom. I left the room, walked across the play yard towards the sheltered toilets, when there was a mammoth explosion. And I turned around, and every kid in the school was coming at me, because the underground shelter was next to the toilets. That was the first V2 that hit Luton. It hit the corner of the cafeteria at 20 minutes to 12. It killed all the staff in the cafeteria, but all the people that were going to lose 20 minutes later were saved. That was my V2.
There was a V1 that hit.
Yeah, my home actually was finally reached the coup de grace with a V1. My parents' house faced up a street, and there was a park at the other end, and the V1 came and landed right at the park entrance. The blast came right down the street. The whole front of our house disappeared. Was pushed back, and the entire furnishings in the front of the house were covered in shattered glass, complete glass.
And what did Grandpa say about the walls?
Yeah, well, after that, when we came back again, my father's, when they lived in that place until about, he lived until about 4 years after the war ended, but my mother lived for a further 10 or more than that, 10 or 12 years. But his comment was, if it wasn't for the damn varnished wallpaper, the house would fall down.
The V1 was a pulse jet engine aircraft. And it would go at about 400 miles an hour. Pretty fast, but it was slow enough that the air raid warning system could carry a warning. The V2 was strictly at ICBM.
Yeah.
And it came into the atmosphere wave guns at the speed of sound, no warning. When it hit, it was all over.
What years were they around?
Well, the V1s and the V2s were the latter part, 1943 to 44.
44 to 45.
44, 45, yeah.
That had a terrifying effect.
Were there barrage balloons among you?
Yes. The idea of the barrage balloons were they had these steel cables, and the idea was to keep the bombers and the fighters up high enough up that they couldn't accurately bomb. That was the theory,
Didn't work.
but it didn't work. It was more or less a morale booster for the populace. But they served the purpose. They weren't that effective, but they could be.
I'd just like to say I was born in England and I was 7 years old in 1939. And I'll just say we brought back many memories of the bombing. We were in the Blitz until my father his career was in the Royal Air Force. And after we were in the Blitz for quite a time. And the same sort of thing as you described. Our street was fairly short and it butted onto a main road. And along the road, of course, were the shops. And all the shop owners and their families lived above the shops. We were in the Anderson shelter, and there was this enormous explosion. We all said, boy, that was close. And then we came out in the morning when they all cleared, when all the shops had gone.
Yeah.
And these were children I used to play with. And the other thing the other shelter we had an Anderson shelter, but the other one that was provided was the Morrison shelter, which was a steel box about 4 foot by 6 foot by 2.5 feet. And you had that in your living room.
We're inside the house.
And you used to go in there. It must have been an incredibly claustrophobic experience. but it wouldn't obviously protect you from a direct hit. But if it was just rubber coming
It
down.
would protect you from the house falling down.
Yes, that's right. And,
I never saw one, but I read about those.
The rubble they used effectively, I think it was 750,000 tons of rubble they used to build airfields for the RAF.
Oh, that's right. During the war, they were pretty smart. They would take rubble and build water tanks in areas. Not very deep. They're only about 2 or 3 feet deep, but they would hold a few thousand, maybe 5,000, 10,000 gallons of water. And they would serve to fight the fires because during the bombing, all the water mains would be broken. So they were pretty smart in many ways by taking rubble, good bricks, making these temporary water holes, and that would serve for
where these shops used to be, they built one of those at the bottom of our road, one of those water tanks.
Yeah.
And then, as I said, my father was posted to, if I can follow up what you said, my father was posted to Canada as an instructor, and a year later in '42, my mother and I joined him, and we went across the Atlantic. That was the height of the U-boat war. And we hadn't been in America very long. I used to go home for lunch, and my mother said, I got a special treat, and she pulled out of the icebox a gallon of ice cream. We both tucked in and ate the whole thing. that was our lunch for that day.
Well, now there's a bit of a coincidence, eh? Thank you very much. Yes.
Did the general populace have any idea about all the radar stations and all that was fighting the Germans, or was that just a big super secret?
The British did invent radar in a very ancient form, but it worked. And
it was called the early warning system, and it was set up along the south coast from the facing Holland, France, and so on. And it was that really that enabled the moment the Germans started to come in, it enabled the RAF fighter to climb up high enough to get above them, so that the killing ground for the German was between south of London and the south coast. There was a very large number of aircraft brought down in that area because the Germans did not understand we had the early warning system up there. Very primitive, but it led us back.
Did you know about that at the time, or did you find that out?
Oh, wait, I didn't know about it. We didn't know about it. It was all top secret.
I became aware of it, of course, when I was in the Air Force.
you flying Lancasters at that time, training British, and also...
In the United States?
Yes.
Oh, no. In the United States, I was an Air Force cadet. I flew a Stearman in primary. I flew a BT-13 at basic, and an advanced, I flew what they called a twin-engine AT-9, AT-10. And then I went to the Central Instructor School at Kelly Field in San Antonio, and there I became a advanced twin-engine instructor. But then when I went back to England, I had to be funneled into the RAF system. So there I started flying one aircraft. I won't go through the recitation, but I'll tell you, I ended up being assigned to fly Lancasters, and I had a crew of 7. I was the only pilot, and we flew 33 missions, 11 of which were by day, 22 by night. I'm not going into details about what happened, but altogether, and so from my experience to tell you, the Lancaster was the primary objective. On VE Day, I was reassigned to Transport Command, and then I flew a thing called a Sterling transport, and I flew troops and equipment from Europe to Karachi, India, until 1947.
And was the Lancaster a single pilot aircraft?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Single pilot. There was starting front to rear, there was a bomb, we called him a bomb aimer, bombardier. There was a flight engineer, a pilot, a navigator, a radio man, a mid-upper gunner, and a rear gunner. Yes. And we selected our own.
And by the way, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross.
Yes, during the war, did either of you ever see any dogfights overhead, like British planes shooting down German planes overhead, or?
I only saw one.
Okay.
I saw, which I now know was a Heinkel 111, being pursued over the horizon by 2 Spitfires.
You never saw any. I think Kathleen mentioned she saw them regularly.
Yes.
She was at the South End on the sea.
Kathleen lived in Southend on the Sea, which was at the entrance of the River Thames to London. So, I mean, the Germans followed it up. So Kathleen saw a lot of activity.
Yeah, the dog fights and what have you as they were coming in.
Yeah.
Was it true, I've understood, that the Goring was attacking the British air forces early in the battle, and the British Air Force was RAF was sort of on the ropes, and all of a sudden Goring, for some reason or other, through Hitler's order, shifted it to bombing London and places like that, and that made a breather for the RAF to recover. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, there definitely is. And I'll tell you how it happened. Goring was determined to kill the RAF.
Oh, yeah.
But one German bomber accidentally bombed London by accident. And that enraged Churchill. So we started bombing the German populace, and that took away the bombing strategies to kill civilians, and it gave the RAF a breather.
Yeah.
So that's true for that.
For example, I came after I said I came back to Britain, and I had to fly other aircraft to finally end up with a Lancaster. I won't go through the whole story, but I flew eventually 15 different airplanes for some 1,700 hours of my career. But what shall I say? No, I lost it. No. Yeah.
That's still a lot of airplanes for a lot of hours.
But Catherine's just reminded me, if I talk about, we were talking here more about the Blitz, not about what I did, but when I was assigned to the Bomber Command, our object was to eliminate fuel installations and marshalling yards, fuel and marshalling, so that by the time when the Germans started the Blitzkrieg on December 16, back in 44, their fighter, opposition of fighter, I never saw a fighter again.
They were running out of...
They didn't have enough gas for the fighters because it was all supplied to the people on the ground in the Blitzkrieg coming through when the Americans returned on, as I said, was it December 16? Yeah, I would say from that moment on, we had no fighter opposition from the Germans. It was all anti-aircraft stuff. Yeah. We just cut off their fuel supply completely.
Hello. I'd like to thank all three of you for taking your time to come to here talking about the Blitz, especially because you don't hear a lot. But I do have a question for any of you. Did any of you spend any time in the underground? And if you did you happen to meet with either the king or the queen at that time? Did you happen to run into them?
I didn't hear all the questions. I know you asked about being in the underground.
Yes.
I slept in the underground a lot because where was it? Elephant and Castle had the deepest.
Where was it? South London?
Yeah.
Elephant and Castle.
Elephant and Castle.
Yeah.
I slept in, and what used to terrify me was the subway trains. That damn great thing would come out of that hole and roll by, and it was so noisy that as a kid I was more afraid of it than the bombs. But yeah, we spent many a night there, and those platforms were crammed full of people. And it was a regular thing. It wasn't just, let's go down to the shelter because the bombs are coming. Let's go down there before the bombs come.
Sure, it got organized eventually that they would line up around dusk. And as people were going home from business, the people were going down into the shelters to sleep for the night.
Right.
Yeah.
Look, one more. Look at you.
This is kind of about after the war. You know, people lost their homes. I imagine they might have still had mortgages. I don't know if they had to pay them.
Well, you have to remember, there were a lot of cities where people did not own anything. They rented.
Yes, like yourself, and you were in a lot of apartments.
I never owned a home until I came to the United States.
But 2 million homes were destroyed. How long did it take until England started having prosperity again after the war?
Oh,
20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Truly long
20,
time.
30 years. My mother, we had a house, as I said, and it took a lot of action. And finally, in this discussion, a V1 at the head of the street kind of damaged the whole front of the house. And we had, just talking real estate, a 3-bedroom house there. dining room and a parlor. Now what happened, we had friends who came to town and couldn't find anywhere to stay. So eventually my house ended up like a parlor, a barracks. The dining room was eliminated completely and turned into a bedroom. Upstairs rooms outside were turned in, and so finally we had almost twice the number of people living in the house than there was when the war started. And for people who could not get accommodation, the government started to build, now I would call them Nissen huts, I think they were.
Tin houses.
They were tin houses, curved tin. They started to clear the land, they took away the destroyed building, and they put down a concrete floor, and they put these concrete, curved huts on there, and families moved in. And they were very primitive, I would say, but they accommodated people.
I visited my grandmother as a teenager. I visited before, but it was 1964. Now rations were ended in 54. But in 1964, my grandmother still did not have a refrigerator. She had a cold cellar. There was an outhouse. Gas, no electric. Took a long, long time. And the house was, the whole neighborhood was bulldozed. I think it was 1969.
Yeah.
And they were all moved. And the joke is my grandmother was standing at the front door with a cup of tea for all the bulldoze drivers. She didn't want to go.
I might add, she put herself into the war effort. After the bombing was over and the draft was in full blast and people were going, a local engineering company over by the park, about 20 minutes walk away, was advertising for people who could handle machinery. Now, my mother went over there and applied to work, and they asked, what do you know? She said, I can operate a lathe. They looked, come in. They took it into the shop, there in front of a lathe. She turned out the pieces that they wanted. What they didn't realize, in World War I, my mother had been drafted and was working in a machine shop in Carlisle in the north of England at that time. But she stayed right until the end of the war, and the manpower came back, and finally she returned to being a mother and a housekeeper. There was a tremendous amount of, as Brian says, you just put your good face forward and did everything you could to make things work. And it required a lot of
well, once more, thank you all. Catherine, thank you so much for being here. Happy 96th birthday in a couple of weeks. Thank you all for coming.